Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I think today's video is going to be a bit of a mix and match type thing. We've had a dull week with a lot of rain, and boy did the garden and things need that rain, so don't take that as a complaint. We really needed the rain. But as a consequence, no sun on the glass, no heat in here. So with a dull week, obviously my watering changes. It's not as a direct result of the dull, less light. It's just a direct result of not having the heat during the day. If it's not as warm, the plants aren't going to use as much water. So I was expecting to have to start my, pot watering today, but having had a look at my records and a look at the sort of daytime temperatures we've had, it's going to be delayed a day. I don't need to look at the pots. I know them well enough over the years to know that's what happens when the weather's dull. It adds an extra day and sometimes 2 days into the, the regularity. But what I thought I'd have a go at is picking on the Oncidiums and their relatives, their families, the intergenerics. And as soon as I started thinking about what I would do, it opened out very, very quickly, and includes far too many plants to get into a video. So I can't go through all of them. It would just, it would end up being part 1, part 2, part 3 and part 4 or something silly like that. So I'm just going to pick on some, and I won't pick on all the good ones because I don't think that's very fair. I mean, when you've been growing many years and you've had a plant for many, many years, it's going to be a pretty big plant in most cases. And that's not really fair on some people who may be just starting out on a collection and, they look at these big plants with multiple flower spikes and think, well, mine doesn't look anything like that. I must be doing something wrong. Well, no, you're not. You've just got a young plant. Lots of my plants started like that, and that's why I pointed at that. I mean, that Dendrobium harveyanum I've had for quite a long time. It's grown into a reasonable plant over that time. It wasn't always like that. Once upon a time it had a couple of canes and an odd flower spike now and again. Whereas now it's got an awful lot of canes and is in flower most of the time. It just keeps going on. It wasn't always like that. I had to do a bit of work to get it like that. And that's really what I wanted to concentrate on today is the workload, the amount of work. And starting off with culture. And now that I've got the grow room and I'm pretty happy with the way it's set up, I understand how it works, I understand the variables and all the things like that. I understand when to block the light off and when to open it up and let the light through. I understand the temperature variables. When the sun hits the glass, it rockets. Even in the winter, it raises the temperature, between 5 and 10 degrees, sometimes as much as that. And I can get up to 25 degrees in the winter time. And that is not good, because when all the plants have settled down to daytime temperatures of around, say, 18, 19, and nights going down to say 14, and then you suddenly dump 25 degrees on them, they don't know what to do. It puts them off their stroke. Puts me off my stroke too. But yeah, the culture at individual plant level in this grow room doesn't really exist. I don't have culture, a way of looking after each individual plant. I cluster them into sets. Now the two main sets are I've got mounted orchids and I've got ones in pots. But then there's subsets. I've got mounted orchids that are bare rooted. I've got some that are in moss. Well, they need to be treated differently, especially ones that are relatively new to their moss, because that moss stays wet. No, I'm not going to start the running gag again. And obviously bare rooted ones don't stay wet. They dry fast, and in the main that's why they're bare rooted. Their culture requires them to have a fast wet-dry cycle. It's how they would grow. So my culture is at the point when I get the orchid. I find out about it, which set is it going to do best in? Would it do best mounted? Would it do best in a pot? And I get that wrong sometimes. What sounds like something that will do really good on a mount, as you've seen over the past months, sometimes wasn't the best of ideas, and suddenly something does better in a pot. And vice versa. I've had things in pots that just haven't been doing that well, and you chuck them up on a mount and they take off like a rocket. So, you can get things wrong at your initial stages. So I get it. Let's take it from, okay, I've gone on the internet, seen a wonderful plant. It had lots of nice pictures showing the base of the plant so I can see whether there's roots or not. Might even have a picture of the pot, and it's a clear pot, and I can see whether there's roots or not. I can see the number of leaves, the number of pseudobulbs, the number of canes. I can have a good look at the plant. Because quite honestly, if I can't do that, I am very reluctant to buy online. And I'm still not happy with somebody who says you will receive a plant like the one on the pictures, because that's their cop-out excuse for sending you something, half the size or something like that, because they'll maintain that it is like the one on the picture because it's called this, whereas it's not what you were expecting. So I like to see lots of pictures. And at the moment, I'm not buying online simply because I don't need or want any more orchids. So I don't need to worry about that. I still have a look around eBay every couple of days to see what's new, see if anything catches my eye. And there's a nice little set of Cattleyas that look pretty good that I've got my eye on from a reliable seller with lots of pictures. That doesn't mean to say I'm going to buy them. It just means to say I'm looking. I'm watching, as the expression goes. So anyway, the culture starts with a new plant. First of all, is the media it's in okay for a bit? Answer, yes. Well, it can stay there till I get round to dealing with it for a bit. If the answer's no, it's coming out of the pot. So that's the first point of call, is what is it growing in? Is it suitable? Is it okay? And can it stay there till I get round to doing it? Or does it need almost immediate attention? And quite a few really do need that immediate attention. So then I need to find out, well, what sort of plant is it? Has it got thin, fragile, wispy little roots, like, say, a Ristreppia would have? Has it got great big fat chunky roots, like a Cattleya would have? And how good is the root system it's got? Having got it out of its pot, as we all know, you can find that the couple of good roots you saw are the only ones it's actually got, and the rest are virtually had it. So you're immediately into a rescue situation to one degree or another. No roots left after you've trimmed it is a rescue plant, that by anybody's description. So we start at that point, and then we have to think about, well, what am I going to plant it in or on? Is it going on a mount? If it's going on a mount, is it staying bare rooted if it's got any? Or is it going in some moss? Well, nothing's going in any moss at the moment because I've run out, but I'm dealing with that. I could pay a few pounds more and get the pack of moss that I want today and get it posted to me, and I would then have it. But the truth of the matter is, apart from one plant, I don't actually need any at the moment. I've done most of what I need to do this year. And I have a good relationship with the guy I get my goods from. My pots, my orchiata bark, my moss, and some plants when he comes to our shows. So I've already said to him that I wanted that moss, and he hasn't got any of that size in stock. And he said, I'll make sure I get you some, for next time I see you. So for me, it would be wrong not to buy that moss now and get it somewhere else. Now, I could do both, because it'll keep. In a sealed pack, it'll keep. Donkey's years, I suspect. Never tried it, but it probably does. So anyway, we're back to we've got our plant out of our pot. We've had a look at the root system, the type of roots, big fat chunky ones, medium sort of ones that readily branch, ones that don't seem to branch very often, so are single roots, they become very precious. Yeah, and we decide what we're going to pot it in or on, and we get on and do it. So that's now a new orchid in the collection. That's a little subset of the orchids, yeah, because I would want to keep closer eye on that one for a while to see if it's going down or perking up and respond to that accordingly. That's me, that's how I would work. Now if it's going in a pot, there'll be two types of things. It'll either be going in just bark or it will be going in bark and moss, and it may even be going in just moss. Now each one of those needs a different treatment. A new plant just been repotted in bark is going to need watering very often for a while because the bark doesn't wet very well when it's new. Now you can get round that by pre-soaking it, yeah, and actually getting it dripping wet. Personally, I don't do that. I don't see the need. I don't have that many new plants at once, and I can make a special exception, keep them near the front of a shelf somewhere separate where I can get at them and just water them more frequently and do it myself rather than messing with the bark. So there's that. If it's in a bark and moss mix, the moss will keep the bark hydrated longer than if it was just bark on its own. Yeah? So yes, it might need watering a little bit more often for a couple of weeks, but not as frequently as the pure bark. I'll make one little exception, my holy pots. Something recently repotted in there in brand new bark will need watering every day for a while because the pot takes away some of the moisture and the bark dries quite fast, and I don't want the plants dehydrating. And then there's those in pure moss. Now I've planted, like say, a Masdevallia in pure moss, and I've gone back a week later and that moss still seems as wet as it was when I put the plant in there. And I might go back another week later and it still doesn't need watering. So I don't use the calendar, I look at the plant and the pot to decide whether or not to water. And then as far as watering is concerned, if plants are actively growing, they might need watering a bit more often, and they'll need some food now and again. So we get into that side of the game, and I've done more than enough on fertilizers and stuff like that, and everybody's got their own opinions. Quite honestly, it's one of those topics that can get you into a flaming row very, very quickly. So you do whatever you do to feed your plants. And if it's working, well, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But plants will need some sort of food at some point. And if they're growing well, actively, with big new growths on, you know, or putting up flower spikes, taking their energy away, they'll need some food. As a classic example, this one here, this has put up, this is Shelob Tolkien, this has put up quite a few strong new growths recently and developed a new root system under those new growths. So that's taken some energy. Now, if I didn't help it by giving it some food, it would have drained all the resources out of the old bulbs. And the plant behind those new growths would be quite depleted. So to balance it out, I feed the plant. And in addition to that, it's finished one spike a while ago, it's just opened two more, and it's got another one coming. It's using energy at quite a rate of knots. So I help it by poking some in at the bottom, yeah? And not letting it stay dry for any length of time. See, now this one's a little bit of an exception. Although I wasn't planning on watering today, I can see that pot is actually quite dry. But when I pick it up, nope, it's probably still wet in the middle, because I know my plants. This one is still quite wet. That would be silly to water that one today. Look at the bark, it's wet. The only dry bit is the little bit near the surface. Okay, and in the humidity I've got, that layering effect is not too much of a worry because I've got high humidity. So the plant will manage with the roots that are down lower in the pot. Yeah. Also, the dampness in this bark is coming up through the pot. Yeah. So it's not as dry as it might look. So, okay, so we've got the thing potted, how and what in we've chosen, and then we've got to think about the culture of the actual plant. And with me, that is one simple thing. Where am I going to put it? That's it. That's the end of the culture decision for me, for that plant. Where is it going to go? Because I know my grow room, and I know the various little microclimates. I know the shadier areas. I know the cooler areas. I know the high light areas. I know the warmer bits. I know the bits that get much more air movement because they're closer to the fans. I know all those little microclimates. So all I've got to choose is where is this plant going to live? And by making that decision, I've decided its culture. Simple as that. It really is, for me, as simple as that. When I first got the Latorias, talking of which, those spikes are coming on. Can't even remember which one that is. Can I see the tag? Yes, I can. It's Roy Tokanara White Knight. So it's a named clone of Roy Tokanara. Tokanara. One of those two. It's too far away, I can't read it. But anyway, those spikes are pushing on, you know. And it's got new growths. So that plant needs a bit more water and feed than perhaps some of the others that have just matured their new growths and aren't producing any more. So that's just the watering and feeding bit. But I did my work on the Latorias. They're continuous growers. You know, they come from tropical areas, mainly from evergreen forests. So they don't need high light. They wouldn't get it where they live, would they? If it's an evergreen forest, the leaves don't fall. So it doesn't suddenly get bright light in the autumn. It stays reasonable most of the year round. But because it's in the tropics, the light intensity, even under the tree cover, is pretty good. So they do need reasonable light, but they don't need intense light, like perhaps some of the other dendrobiums do at part of their year. So for my Latorias, they're clustered together in behind other stuff. There's a couple of flipping great noblies at the back there, and that's because that end has only got one layer of shade netting on, and I didn't want to put that second layer on. I wanted to keep my light levels higher this year and see the difference to decide next year whether to do the same thing again or go back to 2 layers. I thought I'd give it a go, keep my eye on the leaves, any frazzling, and up goes the second layer straight away. But it hasn't happened, so they've enjoyed that brighter light. Just the one layer. But Latorias don't want high light. They need good dispersed light. So they're tucked in behind other things, and as the sun comes round there and moves on round here, they're shaded by other plants. It's not so intense. Yeah? They still get pretty good light coming in from above for the couple of hours across midday, but apart from that, that's it. And then if something needs higher light, it needs to get up out of the up out of the jungle. And to get it up out of the jungle, it's got to go up in the roof. Now that Maxillaria tenuifolia, the coconut orchid, has bloomed not only better this year, but the blooms have lasted a hell of a long time. The only difference, it's gone up there in the roof. It's got more light. As a consequence, it's growing faster, pushing up a lot more new growths. The consequences of that are, it needs watering more often. Yeah, the plant tells me that. You know, those big fat pseudobulbs will start to shrivel if it doesn't get enough nutrition and, well, mainly hydration. So we do that sort of thing. Now, I've got Tolumnias, which we've had quite a good look at recently. And quite honestly, since they were taken out of that old moss, they don't seem as dehydrated, when in theory they should be more hydrated. I don't think they were taking in the hydration because that moss was just acidic. So the roots weren't working properly, whereas now they seem to be working better. I know that's going to be a bit silhouetted. But you notice they've got their back to the light, yeah? And the same with the others. They're up there. Oh, yeah, I'm tied. I've got an umbilical cord because my batteries haven't arrived yet. They've got their back to the intense light. And that is really because they've just recently had their roots disturbed. So they're going to be set back a bit. And until they get some nice new roots and everything like that, I don't want them in intense light. It'll force them into trying to grow without the supporting root system. So I'm not doing it. They just have a little less light lately. That's what I mean by back to the light. As soon as I point the camera up there, it goes silhouetted. That's because the light comes in from this side. And how much is on that rack? This time of year, absolutely nothing. They've all got their backs to the light. Yeah, so they still get good light from above, and they get ambient light from all round. I've got light coming in from 3 sides and the roof. But I don't want them in intense light. Yeah, and it's the same with these. These are a mix along here. Deciduous forest dendrobium, another one. Recovering, God knows what that is, Rhyncholalia, Cattleya alliance. Another recovering plant, that's an iffy plant, you know what I mean. Another, well, it's a Sophronitis, but is now Cattleya anyway. Deciduous forest dendrobium, and cooler. Yeah, it grows reasonably high up, so it doesn't get intense heat. But come leaf fall, it's going to get quite bright light, and the rains will slow down, so it would dry. It would be drier through those winter months. Another deciduous forest one, and that's just a mounted Phalaenopsis. It just lives there because I don't want it anywhere else. But you get the idea. The culture is, have a look at where the plant comes from. Have a look if it's got seasonal variations. In other words, does it get quite a different winter to what it gets in the summer? Don't forget, in the tropics, there aren't 4 seasons. There's really just 2. There's a wet one and a dry one. But the day lengths, the temperatures and that don't change that much. That's why they're lush, green, steamy jungles. Because it stays the same. It doesn't change much, apart from the wet and then the drier period, where they just steam, but they don't get rained on so much. But they don't go bone dry in that environment. So Latoria types, yeah, they come from that sort of environment. So mine are going to slow up in the winter because they're going to lose their day length. So they won't be actively growing, they'll be ticking over. So their watering will come right down to the bare needs of what they are doing at that point. My Nobiles, they're all hybrids, I haven't got the species. And again, they will get the same treatment. They will have matured this year's canes. They'll be nice and big and fat with loads of nice green leaves on, but eventually they'll stop growing. And at that point, they're not going to need anywhere near as much water until activity starts in the spring. You could call it a type of winter rest, but it is not a dry winter rest. It's a reduced watering and virtually no feed winter rest. That's not the same thing. Okay, so that's just how my culture works. The initial work is done when I first get the plant, and then after that, its culture is based on where I put it. And then I don't need to think about each individual plant, apart from keeping my eye on it at watering time to make sure it's not going downhill, and observe any new changes that I might want to film or something like that, but that's it. Okay, so that's a chat about really the decisions I make when I get a new plant and how I place it and why. And like I've said, that really is the basis for the culture of the orchids I keep. Now obviously I haven't got every type of orchid, others are going to have types that I don't have. Catasetums spring to mind because lots of people have got those. I have none, and I have no plans on getting any for my own reasons. But yeah, I mean it's just the basis of how I work is to find out about the plant initially, deal with potting, mounting, repotting, whatever I plan on doing to get it in what I consider to be a happy state, and then place it in the environmental microclimate in this grow room where I think it'll be happiest. And if that doesn't work, I'll change it and try something else. And that's all we can do. Now, everybody's got their own environment, be it a dining room table, a variety of windows facing in different directions. They'll all be different. You know, I mean, even two south-facing windows can be different. One could be shaded by trees, one isn't. You know, people out on verandas, people growing under trees in the garden. There are many variables, but this is my, you know, my grow place. This is where my orchids live. And that's how I go about dealing with them. Now, part 2 of this is going to be a little bit more specific. I'm going to go over the seasonal changes for me on the south coast of the UK and how I deal with those changes. Some of those changes are brilliant, some of them are not so flipping good, but that's what I'll do in part 2. So see you later in part 2.